So thank you for joining us today, either in person or online, for the lecture by Dr. Vayu Naidu. This is also Dr. Naidu's first lecture hosted by society as a fellow of us. So welcome. So Dr. Naidu is a writer, lecturer, and storyteller who has written extensively on Indian myths and oral tales. Since the late 1980s, she has also been involved in multiple performances and productions which pioneer innovative ways of engaging listeners and the theatre audience with oral traditions. Her most recent publication, The Living Legend, Ramayana Tales from Far and Near, published early this year, explores one of the most widely told ancient Hindu epics, Ramayana, the story about the life of Prince Rama. So Ramayana was told and sung in regional dialects and languages by storytellers across India. And I assume many of you would know the story very well. But Dr. Naidu's retelling of this important piece of literature has shed light on the relatively underexplored aspect of the story, the forest, and more specifically, the vital relationships between humans and the nature. So for this evening, she will share with us her discovery of what makes the forest so significant in Ramayana and its contemporary relevance, and thinking of how the original context of an epic age relate to the listeners of the 21st century. So let's welcome Dr. Naidu to the lectern, and let's dive into the fascinating world of myth, storytelling, and nature, please.
Just going to share our screen on Zoom for the folks that are joining there. If you'll just bear with me 1 second. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So namaste and good evening, everyone. Lovely to have you. Normally, if I was in a classroom situation, and that's true for all my online listeners, thank you for sacrificing the warmth of your fireplace or your heaters to be sitting still or making your suppers or lunches wherever you are and spending time with me and us here. So thank you, Royal Asiatic Society, and all of you for being here to listen to The Living Legend. I know it sounds like a rock album, but one of the reasons why I did choose the title, because the epic that it deals with, Ramayana, actually rocks. And it's for young adults. I feel writing for young adults is very exciting because it takes on the youth in some of us who are rapidly aging, but it also deals with a very precise moment in this epic about the age of our young protagonist. But I will explain to you how there is also some kind of a serious element that evolves in making up this title. So with this time we're here together, I've got to encompass a brief history of the oral tradition dating from about 5000 BCE to the 21st century, 2025. Plus, I'm going to tell you about some contemporary storytelling work that happens in relation to the Ramayana and what happens when we switch from the oral tradition of storytelling to actually write a novel. So here goes. So the first exercise you have to do for me is to sit comfortably, and I will have to take you on a journey. So it's about 2 in the morning and it's in Karnataka, and it's in 1986. Those days, the roads were very, very narrow, narrower than our B roads here. And I was on an assignment to do a feature of some cultural heritage in Karnataka. I was traveling in then the only known chariot called the Ambassador car. And I think this one didn't really have shock absorbers. So I thought the only way to deal with this was to listen. In those days, we had the reliable Walkman with headphones, and I was listening to, very appropriately in Karnataka, the Moonlight Sonata. So the waving of the headlights on the road, because of the bumpy road, functioned beautifully with the music, and the landscape was an absolute bliss of cross-cultural perceptions. When suddenly I noticed a raw beam of light from the boulders and the field. And I told the driver, please let us stop. I don't know what's happening. Can we just see? And he switched off the car engine, and the car rolled a bit, and he switched off the headlights. And what I saw there in the distance in the field was 3 neon lights. And they had formed a stage. And these neon lights on the sides had been strapped to a banana tree. And there in the center of the raw ground was a Yakshagana storyteller, Kadaikaran. And there were all these sleeping bodies on these fields and boulders, mothers suckling babies, somebody drunk and talking in their sleep. But they were all, in one sense, watching and listening to the storyteller. So I crept past, and I had a very embarrassingly noisy camera. And I did click when he had his great wooden sword up in the air, which was covered with gold toffee paper, and some of it was peeling off. And he had bells on his feet, a great big mustache. And when my camera clicked, it flashed. And he was in the midst of telling the audience about the meeting of Shiva and Brahma. And Shiva was getting a scolding by Brahma and all the other lesser gods. And Vishnu was sighing. And Shiva was listening when the camera flash went off. And he immediately said, you see, Shiva's third eye opened, and he realized this was the time for Vishnu to go to heaven, to come down from heaven into the world as an incarnation known as Rama. So that really decided it for me, my future. No more doing features, but actually what I was interested in was this art of oral traditions and the storyteller. For me, it was this code switch between mythological time and the contemporary present, the immediacy of what we call presence, of being in performance, and the connection of what is entelechy with manifested reality. It was that moment of the known story or song, what we also call Bina Patrika, which is without a script. And it was an authentic experience, so valued in storytelling of the theater. Of course, I loped off, and those who suddenly woke up with this laughter of the other members of the audience now were perfectly timed and primed for the storyteller's device of coming to a very dramatic moment in the story. So you have this hammock structure of people sleeping, something exciting happening by accident, and then the storyteller prepares them for possibly Vishnu coming down onto earth. So that was in 1985 or 86. But some 50 months later, in 1988, the Cartwright Hall in Bradford opened an exhibition of the Meva Ramayana. And that had been commissioned by Rana Jagat Singh in 1649. Now the British Library has digitized a fabulous collection. But that commission of paintings was completed in 1653. Rana Jagat Singh had died, and it was by the court studio of Udaipur. He was indeed a desert king with the dream of forestation. I had arrived near Cartwright in Leeds, and I was doing my PhD in the workshop theatre, which had been set up by Wallace Shoinker and Martin Barnum. I was fervently studying Peter Brook's intercultural production of Mahabharata, which was taking place at the City of Culture, which was Glasgow, and in the tram shed. So I had no idea that Ramayana would shape the craft of storytelling in English, or arts education in multicultural society as it was known then, or in theatre, or in responding to conflict, or workshops in corporates and business relationships and charities. So you see, Ramayana is so, let me see if I get this right. Things happening. I was told to give it a zap like that, but yeah, sure. Or maybe I should use this arrow. Try, I think Richard is techno star.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anyway, I'll keep talking till it
Okay.
behaves.
You can
Okay.
you can use the keyboard with that.
Ah, that's lovely. Okay, fine. So I'm probably using the word mythopoeic more as a storyteller, combining the actual telling of myths with a sense of symbolism and poetry. But there is also something about the structure. And I thought this particular visual did it all. It's, I think it's universal in all cultures, but it is how everything gets put together and you finally see how a story can travel. But the wonderful thing about Ramayana, which is why I've called it the living legend, yes, it's an epic, but it has folk variations, many folk variations. Also, there's a festival around it. In fact, two festivals. One during Rama's birth, which tends to happen at the change of season around April. And then, of course, we have the celebration of Diwali or Deepavali, which is with all, diasporic societies across. I mean, even if you don't belong to the epic or its religion, it is celebrated. Even, in fact, even our banks today will always say, or Marks and Spencers will have a Diwali greeting. So it's really, about festivity, and it helps traditionally in economy. It is manifested in the arts, and it is about continuity, and it has been kept alive, both the oral tradition and particularly with Ramayana, it has been kept alive because of interpolations. With oral traditions, as you'll see when I'm talking about what happens when you're writing, is that it's immediate. You've got an audience. You're looking at their reactions. You're nodding your head, sir, or somebody's grumpy. It may be something that they're carrying with them, but it's a change and an investment of emotional intelligence that the storyteller can move forward, bring in a social context. It is also a platform for ideas. How it gets manipulated, that's a different thing. And I'm not discussing that here. I'm discussing how the epic, its structure works in oral traditions and otherwise. So I was talking, my big idea is how one bridges it as a universal epic, and that it is enjoyed by a global audience. That's of great interest to me. And so I didn't know when I had embarked on it in English, that was what was starting to happen, not just by me, others have written about it. And this is going super fast now. One second. Sorry about this. Well, you're getting a quick glance of everything that's going to take place.
Yeah.
Okay, that will just stop at that. Yeah, thank you. Apologies for the stop and starts. So in India, the Ramayanas that I was exposed to was initially Telugu. My grandmother was a storyteller and would tell the entire Telugu Ramayana. And she actually made us play with the puppets and dolls every festival. But I had also heard at different performances in parts to the Kamba Ramayana, and I was fascinated by the Kritibas Ramayana, which is known as Sri Ram Pachali, the Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas, often recited at temples in the north, which I would go and listen to. And indeed, the great originator is Valmiki and his Ramayana. And these are the different languages which one was exposed to in hearing it. But as we all know also that Ramayana did spread to South and East Asia. And here are some of the countries. I mean, one of the things they say from the Bay of Bengal, Southeast, as arts and craftsmen went to build different temples in these spaces, they carried with them stories. And with the story, I think Ramayana was possibly the most well-known and most popular. And these are the different variations. They are not just told, but they are, active as puppetry, song, dance, multisensory performances as partly as ritual as well in the temples. They tend to focus on themes of duty and courage. Where Rama is always the victor and always very transcendent sometimes. He may be suffering a lot of things, but he always has an expression of tremendous equanimity. I don't know how much that helps with a sense of drama. But in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, there are a lot of revisionist interpretations, particularly of what we call the anti-hero Ravana, and that's more in the novel form. So it's quite interesting. There's a greater expression and nuances that come in a different form in the writing aspect rather than in the performative. So as one was training students in the oral tradition, University of Kent, which was predominantly English students and possibly a few who were Turkish. The way I would go about with it is the way I had been trained by storytellers from Bengal and Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, which was through Shravana, which is hearing and listening with the external senses, Manana, which is absorbing with the subtle body inside and reflecting on it, and Nidhyasana, which is about inquiry and perception, and your real practice of the storytelling. It's the most difficult art form to practice because you always need an audience, you need eyes to look into, you need a face that interacts with an expression, and you can't do it to the mirror. You can't do it in an empty room. So when we go back to that Yakshagana storyteller, he was probably waiting for some object to come in the night and flash that camera. You need those surprises, and that's what makes that practice actually work. I would say in England, because I'm talking about how we've been able to transpose this epic into English for audiences here. At a time when we started, people weren't familiar with the epic. And it's always that very knife-edge moment when, how do you use humor? Because you don't want to disrespect the culture from which a story is coming, and yet you want to relate to an audience who's not at all acculturated in this epic or the way it thinks, and how can one bring that element of entry point into an epic with very serious cultural values, and which I feel always goes through with humor, and especially the device of the storyteller is incredible in letting one have that sense of call, response, and interaction. one of my students, CJ, he's exceptional. He does Ramayanas as raves as well, and he's just able to take the epic into a different dimension with all its poignance and profundity. And Emily Parrish has also worked a lot with different sources of musicians and brought a different light to the epic. And that, personally, I think is what is so brilliant about the oral tradition. And what I really enjoy is what variations, what other kinds of inquiries we can bring to what is a universal epic, wherever it may have originated. That is the beauty of epics. That is the beauty of legends. They're for all humanity to take part in. So there's just something in the methodology that I borrowed, derived from the Sanskrit aesthetics. We also have a lot of folk aesthetics where we use this term called rasa. Very simply, it's actually the juice or the emotional intelligence of a kind of repertoire of emotions. Why do we tell stories? Because we wish to awaken something in our listeners. And as tellers, we are awakened by certain emotions that are evoked in different circumstances or events in the playing out of a story. So Sahardya is the intention, that's the bridge, and my particular interest is of transposition of language across cultures, languages of the heart, languages of other literatures, and how we can work this out. And working with music is a big part of my life. Now we come to this whole writing moment. So I have done, I think, at least about 1,800 performances of the Ramayana, which is standing and telling the story for about 2 hours at a time. Great standing practice. And it's a great meditative practice, but you're using a space where you can create a forest, you can create a kingdom, you can create an anger chamber, you can create an interior. But how do you transport all that into writing without it sounding sentimental, without it sounding clunky? That was the challenge. So the transition from telling to writing was trying to hold this chemistry of the visualization that as an oral traditions teller, you have to develop, have to meditate, and have. And it's not a religious practice, it's a theater practice to arrive at that authentic moment. So for me, the real game changer with writing was with storytelling orally, you follow plot. It's very plot driven. Traditionally, a storyteller would have 18 nights to tell a story, each night taking an aspect. It's nuanced. At light of day, people leave. But we live in very, very modern times, and there isn't that kind of time. And the storytellers from the villages are dying out because there's a thing on the television which goes on the loop. So what I needed to do was go through this sound barrier, this because with storytelling so evocative with the voice of the words and the poetry, here you're dealing with silence. And I was reading a book which at that moment didn't make sense to me at all. But there was one phrase that kept coming from Upanishadic literature was 100 years a forest, 100 years a kingdom, 100 years a forest. And so on it went. And I thought to myself, why this forest? Why this kingdom? Because in several of the Upanishads, the opening before the actual commentary begins with the sage, There will be a king, a merchant, they've lost their wealth, they've lost their kingdom, they've lost their wives, the wives are cuckolding them. Something has happened. Their sons are wanting to kill them, and they have arrived at this any hermitage, and they are looking for peace of mind. And then the sage opens into a great commentary and a text by giving different examples. But it's always in the forest. It's not in a peaceful shrine at a temple in the royal court or something like that. It's not in a monastery, okay? It's not with a counselor or anything, or a pundit or a horoscope reader or an astrologer. It is in the depth of the forest. Okay, so this forest becomes a space for solitary confinement, revelation, exile, and in Ramayana, it becomes a space for the strongest of friendships. And for me now, I was already married to Rama and Sita and Lakshmana and Ravana and Shurpanakha. You get married to all of them. You know, you can be sleeping and somebody wakes you up and say, okay, do the 5th kanda of the Ramayana. You get up and you'll do it. You know, it's like that. It becomes your being. So I was thinking, what is it about the forest that I can take away? Can I make it a character? But no, I didn't need to look too far. As we all know, the Ramayana plot lines, I'm sure you know there is a king, he has 3 wives, he's a very powerful and successful king, but he has no, as we say in South India, no issues. What it means is he has no children. That's the wonderful way of how English works in India. He had no issues. So, and I used to think, what concerns, what issues are they talking about? And so it gets unraveled that he has no children. He does the Ashwamedha. Please read the book. You'll get to know what Ashwamedha is. And he gives his wives, 3 wives, give birth to 4 sons. Rama's the eldest. And when he is 16, a sage in a forest, the sage is called Vishwamitra. He used to be a brilliant military strategist, a very powerful general, and he was still seeking truth, and he never found it through all his wars and his conquests. Suddenly, one day, he just gave it all up and became a hermit. And he comes through the Dandaka forest to the king, and he says, I want your son. Why? Because he says there are some malevolent forces in the forest that needs to be dealt with. Rama is 16 now, okay? So let me just take you through the plot lines. Rama goes with his brother Lakshmana. They vanquish what has to be vanquished. This opens the gateway for marriage into another kingdom. Rama marries a lady called Sita. They come back to Rama's father's kingdom on the eve of the coronation. Rama is exiled into the forest for 13 years. His wife Sita insists she will go with him. And in some of the folk dimensions of the telling, it's a wonderful line, also mentioned in Paula Richmond's many Ramayanas, that Sita always says, Rama, if you don't take me to the forest, you know, there's no story left. So Sita has always gone to the forest, and that's how we have the Ramayana, which is, you know, great sense of stamp and emphasis of a female protagonist in it. So they're spending their 13, and Lakshmana joins them as the sort of bodyguard, because he doesn't want to stay back in the kingdom. The kingdom is being looked after by another brother of Rama's. And 13 years go by in the forest. And if any, you know, person wants to get elected, that's the best kind of campaign to do. Live 13 years in the forest, meet all kinds of people, and really understand how the environment works and how it's going to impact on industry and economy. So they do that across a geographical terrain. And then we have a very powerful, magnificent emperor of an island kingdom, Ravana, who has always pined for Sita. He wishes to have her for himself, so he abducts her. And, well, the fight for getting one's wife back leads to a war. And after the war, Ravana is killed, but a new king is placed in Lanka. And when Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita come, 14 years of their exile has concluded, and he ascends the throne. That's your simple spine of the story. It works through Thailand, it works through Khmer versions, Indonesian versions. That's your plot line. But when I wanted to start writing this, there are oral versions, and each version is actually an authorship. And this is where the oral tradition has given that space for the nuanced thinking of each person who has meditated on the text and come out with their version. So they are the author. So Tulsidas has thought and meditated of a particular aspect by which it becomes Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas. Or Kritibas has thought of Lakshmana in a certain particular way and the poignance, and it ends in very differently from the other Ramayanas. That is a Bangla sensibility of how it carries forth. So when I was thinking of doing, what am I doing with the forest here? So I thought, okay, as used to be told in the Telugu version, let's have the person who's called Ratnakar. And he's an absolutely nasty piece of work in the forest. He's sort of self-proclaimed king of the jungle. He stops different travelers, takes their money, kills them. Lovely, a lot of wedding travelers would pass through the forest. And that's how he feeds his family. But he stays in the boundaries of the forest. It's an unknown forest that the writer, who later comes to be known as Valmiki, has talked about. So here we have one day in this forest where this man Ratnakar is being terrorizing everybody. We have a person, Narada, his name is, and he is a storyteller, fantastic device, who is able to commune with the gods, the mortals, and the underworld. Whether we call them demons or not, that's up to you. So he sees this person with a certain kind of a, glow about him, and he recognizes it, and he wants to know, what is this secret? So Narada is also known as a Manasputra, or a mind-born son of Brahma, the creator. And he is, let's say, a trickster and an epiphany. Okay? And I just find that very interesting. But because he is that within the mind, he also brings about a kind of a realization. He actuates something, he delivers something. So Ratnakar has seen him and he says, come on, I want what you've got. And Narada says, well, okay, I'll give you a little question. Why don't you go and ask your family? Will they take your sins on their head and will they die for you? And he says, of course, they love me so much. Of course, I'll do it. He's Ratnakar's a guy of certitude, He may be bankrupt or whatever, but wow, he can promise millions and he gets it by any means. Sounds familiar? But he ties Narada up to the tree. And he says, okay, I'll come back with the answer and let me see what you can do. Give me your secret. Of course, when he asks his father and his mother, they say, how can you, want death on us as your beloved parents? And, they're busy dawdling around with the jewel boxes he's stolen from a wedding party before that. He goes to his wife and he asks her, surely you would give your life up and take all my sins on your head. And she looks at him and she says, what kind of a beast are you? I have brought forth these children. You want me to leave them? They'll be orphans. What kind of person are you? And this man is horrified that nobody would be there to stand by him. It's a huge thing. It's like a great explosion within when you are so full of certitude. And there is a moment even in the Mahabharata that comes up, the little riddle that what is the thing we are most certain of? And it is that each moment we could die, but we think life is always ours. So this is that moment he goes to Narada, completely defeated. Narada unties himself. He gets Narada. He unties Narada, and Narada says, "Okay, it's just one word, the secret, and it's Mara. You keep repeating it when you're calm, and when you keep repeating it, the secret will come to you. So I'll go," and off he vanishes. Vanishes means Ratnaka's watching him, just this glow going off in the dark. He's tired and hungry and outraged, and suddenly he says, "Okay, I'll repeat this word." But it's so guttural. And when he's repeating it, we call it, what is it? Semantic satiation, I think, when you repeat something and then another word emerges from it. So Marama, Rama, 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 Rama is coming out. And as it chimes out, suddenly he starts focusing on it so much that he falls silent, and it's going like an inside Tanpura, like a drone inside him. And he just meditates on that. Not consciously, it happens. He's sitting down, he's in silence, and even an anthill grows on him. So steady is his concentration that people walking by says, "My goodness, his concentration is amazing. We shall call him Valmiki." So that's how this robust criminal becomes Valmiki. So when he wakes up from this meditation, he is now able to see in the future of a young man going to be born. This is as the story goes. And his name is Rama and his life. But he feels he's so impure, he must take a vow of silence, which he does. Then suddenly one day he sees two Kuravanji birds mating, and their pleasure is so immense, the male and the female. And he's looking on it, and he's thinking of a poem that's about to come out when a hunter's arrow strikes at the breast of the male bird, and there it falls in a pool of red blood. And this Ratnaka, transformed into Valmiki, utters forth a cry. And that is the wonderful, better than Cecil B. DeMille's introduction to this amazing epic, which comes across in about 500, I think, shlokas and verses and 7 kandas, which are like divisions. So here we are in the forest. It's all happened. And in the book, I explain the relationship about kings and these sages or hermits who live in the forest. They are watching these different migratory patterns, the bend and the turn of the river, what's happening. These also negative forces like the Asuras that are coming and polluting some of the resources in the forest. So the forest is actually a big part of the universe, of which the kingdoms are only a small part of the actual living that happens. It's the forests that source the life of the courtier and the kingdom. So that balance has to be kept and has to be to the fore. So when our Vishwamitra has been experiencing a violation by Ashura on the dhuni or the fires of the ascetics that are lit for meditation practices, he marches barefooted now that he has given up his martial identity. He asks Dashratha for Rama, and Rama goes. enters Dandaka. And the main thing is, somehow Rama seems to know what's at stake in saving the forest from destruction. How is this supposed to have come about in a 16-year-old boy? Greta Thunberg wasn't there. But we understand somehow that at that age, something happens. So what happened for me is that as the writing fiction demands also the truth, not just logic, the forest and its botany had to have the key to unlock Rama's understanding of something called Advaita, which is the nectar of supreme knowledge, which came from a very old text during Rama's time called the Yoga Vashishta Sara. Because one of the sages who used to be his mentor in the palace was sage Vashishta. He was always the diplomat in the court. If Vashwamitra comes and storms off, it's a bad insult to the kingdom, Vashishta would intervene. And he would take care of a lot of the rituals, but he's also Rama's personal tutor. And he is teaching him or guiding him through this philosophy of Advaita, which means not dualistic. That there is this great intelligence and this consciousness called Brahman, and it's all-pervading, and being aware of it is a moment of great peace and bliss. Exactly what the other Upanishads are arriving at. Now here's this 14-year-old boy moving towards 16, hearing this, and he says, oh, this Brahman is amazing. I don't want to be a prince. I don't want to have to do any of these duties. Let me go into a cave and I'll meditate on this. So the Yoga Vashishta Sara as a text is a whole dialogue between Vashishta, who has introduced this germ of an idea called Brahman, and now he's telling Rama, where will you go? Brahman is everywhere. Even your manifested form, your manifested role, your duty as a prince, because naturally Dasharatha is standing there in the wings getting very nervous that his son is going to become an ascetic and who's going to take over the dynasty and the running of a kingdom. So this is a counterpoised argument, this text, which is explaining to Rama and debating with him through a dialogue that everything, even as I'm speaking to you, this manifestation, this vibrance, this what you would see as evil, everything coexists, and there is this running current through life. All this was brilliant philosophy. I loved it. But how am I supposed to prove that in the forest, there's this kind of interconnectedness that Rama is experiencing with all living beings? Because later in the epic, we have his friendship with Hanuman, and he has his army, the Sugriva's monkey army kingdoms leading to the battle in Lanka. So how are all these interconnectednesses happening? So I volunteered at Chelsea Physics Garden, and it was in the glass house hosting the ferns that I got interested in the 19th century obsession with ferns, otherwise known as Helicophyta. Please help me with the Latin, Polypodio Precida. So basically ferns. So while there was, there's a lot of very interesting 19th century social history of class integrating dating among 19th century fern hunters. But I screwed my courage to the sticking place and started looking at the structure common to human, animals, and plants brought to our knowledge by ferns. And this structure was the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, which generates energy to the rest of the body. Now, it's not just for humans, it's in plants, it's in animals. So here was this little spring of Advaita coiled up tightly like a fern leaf, which is slowly beginning to unravel. More for me about this relationship and what is at stake. Because thus far, the forest is about the balance of the world. And it's about kingdoms. It's about the body politic. But this was going into something very, very deep about what we all contain and what we are all in a way responsible for. And was that the kind of explanation Vashishta was doing in the dialogue to Rama? That for me was of particular interest. So my adventure as a writer gained momentum, but I also wanted to know if Ramayana as an epic thought this way as well. And I had to prove it with some kind of, is the Ramayana thinking along those ways? There are many Ramayanas. And is there some illustration by which we could see this? This one, and I'm very thankful to Rita Dixit, who's with us here today. I had looked, the great joy of selecting a book cover is you're abandoned in a forest of images, and suddenly your editor will tell you, not that one, it's too expensive, not this one, it's too cheap, not the other one because it doesn't go with the other book. So anyway, I spent many happy hours and I wanted to know what this was about. And I think you've read it. And here he is in the forest battling with, I think his title is Titian, battling with Titians or Titians. Yeah. So anyway, basically Asuras. Yeah. Okay. So now what became of great interest was I wanted to have really some evidence of the Ramayana, of any kind of visual evidence that would suggest that they were, preparing and also getting immersed in the forest. So here is this painting, which is Kangra, and it's Rama and Sita arrive in the forest. It's about 1820 to 1830. And I'm actually reading out some of the notes that I was given. I've sort of split it in many parts. So here they are busy anointing themselves with a particular sap from a tree. So you're seeing these hands holding a cup by a tree. Okay, there is the sap tamer taking this sap from this tree, and then they are anointing their hair with it because it is a mosquito repellent, a forest insect repellent. So I think that, that there is a great practical function also to this, a practicality of going into the forest, because most tellings will say, oh, and then the whole of Ayodhya followed them, and then they came back to the city, and there Rama and Sita went off. But here is such a lovely practical example of themselves actually preparing from their life of court and so-called sophistication into dressing for this stage in life. And their names are also written over there. And they're coming in contact with people who are working in the forest. So it's the painting, here's the tapper, in more detail. So from the notes, the painting is from the Pahari region, situated at the foothill of the Himalayas and with distinct flora and fauna that one would not find in a deciduous tropical forest like Chitrakoot. But then these are the different imaginings of how to make the Ramayana work. And it is listed that the central flowering tree could be any number of flowering fruit trees, such as myrobalan and the cherry plum, the thylaka or the cluster fig. The tapped tree resembles the Ficus elastica, which is a rubber tree, but it's most likely to be a stylized interpretation of a tree with medicinal properties. But there is visual evidence in the Ramayana of the forest being a reality that they have to experience, and they live for most of the epic in the forest as a couple. This anointment, for me, is, okay, that was like, yeah. As a novelist, was an immersion of the characters in the landscape of adoption and adaptation. The visual art gave a stronger support of how important the forest was to kingdoms, and in the novel, The Living Legend, more of the hermitage as a climate observatory is stated, and you realize the relevance of the environment for the balance in all things. So Vashishta's dialogue with Rama to see the consciousness of an all-pervading presence and understand the interconnectedness that keeps the balance in life is his understanding, Rama's understanding of what is at stake in saving the forest. It is an arc of narrative developed from the moment Valmiki opens that possibility, including himself in the story. When Vishwamitra beckons, it is the experience of fear and understanding what's at stake for life. Plants, animals, humans, everything. In story terms, if there is not an Ashura or a malevolent being or a contradictory thought, how do we comprehend being endangered? So really that's the sum of what I'm trying to say and why the forest comes in. But in terms of the narrative as well, you see these lovely anticipations in the forest. Here are the fearless deer. Okay, this is a motif. It comes up in Mrigavati, it comes up in Sufi texts as well. But you'll see that it's so important why Sita is here amongst the wild and with the deer and unsuspecting, and which finally, with Maricha coming in later, she sends Rama away to get the golden deer and she's abducted. So it's these wonderful little twists, turns, using the wild and using these tactical devices to complete this epic. So here is, yeah. So really it's, we have Sumantra who is leaving this scene of exile with his head turning back about what an important thing the forest is, or at least I would like to interpret it, before he turns his head to return to the kingdom, which is being run by Bharata till Rama comes back. So there is a sequel to this, which is Sita, and I just wanted to say with the Living Legend, there's a kind of a connectivity. And thank you very much. If you wish to join me on a writing retreat with the Tiger Trail, do come. This is where it's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu, for the very inspiring talk and for sharing and showing us the miniatures, which is great. So we've got some time for questions or comments or any sharings that anyone would like to share with us. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Oh, it's loud. Thank you, Vayu. Thank you. This was wonderful. I suppose one question I have is, could you expand more on shifting from spoken word to prose? And did you try out some things and thought, no, this does not work? You mentioned that you were trying to write it in a way where it didn't become sentimental, etc. But yeah, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? That would be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think, yeah, in some texts, I mean, a very basic thing is exclamations, I'm afraid I have used some taking advantage of the fact it's for a young adult. And one has to really be careful how you're keeping into an epic narrative without the thous and the theys and the hey and the Braveheart moment. I was thinking football. I was thinking about scoring a goal and that amazing adrenaline that comes. But you've got to be measured, especially, and I always remember that Yakshagana storyteller, the hammock moment. Make sure your line, your plot is like a hammock. You can go low and keep some humor trembling there. Like there are passages. I think Ravana is a magnificent person. Tremendous qualities. Actually, we learn more about life from him and his pain and his loss. And so, but there is also space for humor about how he can be so dismissive about lesser beings. And yet his focus on Sita is just phenomenal and what he appreciates. So it's always playing with balances. There were times when I'd write something or in the telling, it could be very humorous, but in the writing, it just fell apart, you know? So it's hard work, yeah. But it's avoiding sentimentality, figures of speech, one needs to, and also when we're doing something from another culture and expressing it in another language, those transpositions. But you're such a linguist, and you're very skilled in knowing how to keep that balance.
Thank you, Vayu. That was a talk and a storytelling session. We really enjoyed that. How much do you think that the freedom of, say, giving a new inflection to the characters? You know, I was reading it and thinking, as I was telling you, I've never found such a nice Rama as in your telling, or such a spunky Sita, no? Because of course, many of the retellings, Sita is supposed to be, you know, be a model of selflessness, devotion, and all that. And how much do you think the kind of freedom to reimagine them as people and as characters come from being a storyteller who has to, you know, engage the audience and, you know, has the presence and I suppose the power to do so?
Thank you for that question, Francesca. It's a one of those plant questions which, you know, one waits for, so you can unfold. And thank you for that. Two things happened. One is when we are looking into the cultural history of India, there is that Vedic time when boys and girls were educated together. So there is a kind of an independence about them, and there are certain tellings of Ramayana where Sita will walk in front of Rama. By the time we come to Tulsidas Ji's time, she's either in between or she's walking behind. So these are so subtle with their social context coming in. Now, the Kambar Ramayana, which I've heard more in sort of when I've seen Kutus and thing, she's quite very feisty. And then I've seen Marathi versions of Sita, very, very feisty. And then you start going back and saying, oh, have they just put that on? Why? But then if she is of Agni, then it is the spirit of fire, you know. And it's you have to keep playing with these different kind of versions as well. And I think my grandmother's Telugu version had a lot of license in it. She was a very young widow and she had been a very young mother. So she really knew a thing or two about what girls should be doing. And so, you know, what goes into your ear at a very young age. But I do think the south of the Vindhya versions have a very feisty Sita. And you know, when it's, yeah, and I always related to, well, okay, there's evidence because she's got this temperament of Agni, so she can order Lakshmana to light it. And she can, in fact, one of the versions is where she and Janaka and her mother gone for a holiday. And Janaka's watching from the window, her clearing the garden, and suddenly she pulls up Shiva's bow, you know. So there are all these celebrations of her from different communities, either forest or in towns. So I think it's studying those different variations rather than always giving our 21st century post-feministic take on it, you know. So that was my excitement.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Naidu. I think it's very interesting. I'm a Tamil from Southeast Asia, what is now called Malaysia. And we never had lessons in our regular schools or the Ramayana, which is all an oral tradition. And most of it was the Sri Lankan Tamil version. It concentrated on the kidnapping of Sita to Sri Lanka, the Lanka, and things like that. So at an old age, I'm beginning to learn a bit more. But then there's another aspect that the Ramayana that went to Southeast Asia is still celebrated in the state of Kelantan in Malaya, which has been controlled by a Muslim political party from 1959. So they have these, what they call shadow plays, wayang kulit, which is also, I think, present in Cambodia and places like that. I don't think it is in India.
We do have in Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah.
Tolabama.
Yeah, wayang kulit. But now the problem is that some of the extreme Muslims in the state of Kelantan, which has been for the last 60 odd years controlled by a Muslim party, they want the wayang kulit to be abolished because they think it's un-Islamic. It's contrary to what I gather that in the BJP in India is against people saying that the Ramayana has different versions. And so what are your comments on these things?
Thank you for bringing that up. Traditionally, actually, again, this Tola Bomalatu, Tola literally means leather, and Bomalatu is puppetry, as in Andhra, because Muslims ate meat and they handled leather or dried it. So they are often the puppeteers of the Ramayana. So I'm just saying it was a profession, it was taken like that. Yes, we are going to always have these tensions. And my big take is this is an extraordinary epic. It's the first linear narrative of telling. And I think throughout, I mean, we have come into the idea, when I say we, all of us as people in the 21st century, the idea of nationhood is only a 20th century phenomenon. And the idea of calling it has originated in the geography of what is the Indian subcontinent. It celebrates certain cultural values, but to appropriate anything and or perhaps politically vandalize certain things, whichever community it is, that we are stepping away, I think, from what the real epic is trying to say. And that's part of my premise of saying it's about connectedness, going back to a very pre-Hindu and Indic way of thinking from the Upanishads. And if it's about connectedness, I think it is for all. And that is why communities took part in it as a celebration. The regnal title of the Thailand king is Ram, not king something. So it has spread. And I just don't feel any epic, whether it's a Gilgamesh, whether it's Isis and Osiris. This is the map of human history and civilization in certain parts where it's being embedded with certain cultural values. And even if those cultures or those customs have died out. It is a map of our human history. And that's the way I work on this epic. Because bringing it to England, how many, Scandinavian students, English students, Welsh students, African Caribbean students, we've done Mahabharatas and we've done the Ramayanas. That's the point of these things, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Anyone? Okay, so thank you, Dr. Naidu, for the lecture. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Just give you a round of applause to Dr. Naidu for the lecture. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please welcome people tomorrow. And
Yeah.
Thank you so
Continue the discussion. Thank you.
there are books for sale if you wish, otherwise you